When he pushes the panic button, he's like, I don't know. I don't think anyone's going to call. I don't think anyone's going to call and do the password. Like, we don't even know our neighbors that well. And she's like, trust me, the neighbors of Sweet Valley will do their part. And then their phone rings and she looks at Eric and she's like, she goes, it's working. The system's working.
Look right into your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Talking trends and hierarchy. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Relentless focus on their bodies. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. What do they mean by all American? Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. No sex, just titillation.
Hi,
Dr. Pardo.
how are
Hello. I hate this
Hello.
book.
you? Oh, you do?
Yeah. And so I'm worried that I'm going to bring everything down and you're going to have a bad time because of me.
No, that's okay. I always welcome your feelings and I always learn from them and your thoughts and your perspectives. And I look forward to learning from you. And I think either way we'll have a nice conversation because it's funny. I think it's a hateable book. I think there's certainly hateable, annoying things about it. And the sort of book at large could be described as hateable.
Mhm.
And yet,
And yet-
dimensions of the book and components of the book I find compelling and I find that I was excited to talk to you about. So I think
Okay.
we're going to have a robust conversation.
Great.
And I'd like to start off with a personal anecdote.
Please.
I'm minding my business, walking my dog.
Tina.
Yeah. I am walking down my own street
Hmm.
and I see a sign on a yard that makes me say, am I hallucinating? That makes me sort of question the nature of my own reality and makes me
OMG.
think, what is actually happening here? And have I gone absolutely cuckoo off the deep end and must I be 5150'd?
Sure, of
Because
course.
it cannot be so that what I'm seeing on this yard sign is what I'm seeing. And I'm going to text you right now the
This
yard
is
sign,
live, listeners.
the yard sign that I did see. And you just tell me if anything stands out to you. And that's the yard sign that I did see with my very own eyes. Tell the
Do you,
listeners.
before we even get into that, do you feel safe?
I do because I have a dog.
Thank God. So Pardo sees a terrifying
I may
yard
have to go
sign.
on the run.
Yeah. For sale from the DeLuca team, spelled wrong, but that's fine.
Mhm.
Frank DeLuca, who is a noted mob boss and criminal, is apparently selling homes. And I'm not going to give away the name of your street,
Thank you.
but I
We could
did
also
think
bleep
about
it.
it. Ah,
I know you did.
I cannot believe that.
Is that terrifying? Literally, the name is Frank DeLuca. Frank DeLuca is the name of the murderer in today's book. It reminded me of something that once happened to my colleague, which I'm sure I told you, but it's actually kind of a crazy story, which is when I was at Facebook,
Mhm.
my friend slash guy on my team, one day he's at the gym. People in Silicon Valley love to be always being at the gym. They love to sort of be like, I am a machine. My job is to optimize my efficiency and productivity. I must engineer myself to be a sort of lean kind of output producing device.
Yeah.
And how might I continue to erode any traces of humanity that may linger? Not this guy, this in particular. This guy was a peach, but he's at the gym. He's, I believe, listening to the audiobook. I don't know if he was listening to the audiobook or reading. I feel like listening to the audiobook. And what I learned from my friend Robert, who was on Jeopardy, is that you should trust your first instinct on stuff because it's usually the right one.
Except when it's not.
And then you lose $10 million.
Yeah, let's just keep
Not for
moving with the
nothing.
story, if you don't mind.
So he's listening to the audiobook of the book about Elizabeth Holmes. I want to say it's called Bad Blood or something like that. Theranos person, obviously. And he gets back to his apartment, and at his door, like in his unit, there is a package, and the package is addressed to Elizabeth Holmes. And he says, like I said when I saw the art sign, I'm hallucinating, something's not right, someone 5150 me, and so on and so forth. And then he realized and learned that actually Elizabeth Holmes was his next door neighbor. And that is a pretty cool story. And she's not a mob boss, but she did probably kill a lot more people than even Frank DeLuca probably has.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Inadvertently.
Ah,
She didn't
you're
hold an
right.
actual gun to their actual head. But
That we know
she's
of. And allegedly, again, of course, we can't be sued right now. We just
allegedly,
can't.
we are not the judges and juries of Elizabeth Holmes.
No.
And if there's one thing we can say she's guilty of, it is certainly her turtlenecks.
Oof.
It is certainly some of her hairstyles and eyeliner choices.
Yeah. Because not choosing is still a choice.
Some of her demeanor indexicals, she's guilty of. No crimes, I can say.
You know what I like about you, Rebecca Pardo?
They're
It's
pretty.
that you can take on so many different levels. On the one hand, you can be really serious, but you have a great sense of humor, and you can be really silly too.
Imagine.
Do you know how
such a
hard it
person.
is? Do you know how hard it is to find that in someone?
It's really, really hard to find someone who's boring at school, boring at home, boring at work, boring in the summer, and boring in the winter. And thank God he found Liz. Wow.
Listeners, I was reading a passage from the text where one character is describing Liz, and it's not true about Liz, but I did write in the margin, Pardo.
Hi, right.
Pardo.
Oh my
Because I
gosh,
feel like
that's
that's
so
so you.
sweet.
You're like
Wait,
funny and serious and thoughtful, and yeah.
You were saying this unironically? What page?
I saying that unironically, and it is bottom 82, top 83.
When you give me a unironic compliment, it's the best day of my life.
Oh,
I
wow.
treasure those moments.
Really
I'm so
hoard
used
them because
to-
they're few and far between.
On the one hand, you can be really serious. Certainly. But you have a great sense of humor. Duh. And you can be really silly. Definitely silly. It is hard to find that in someone.
It is, and I feel bad because this character did not find that in someone.
Nope.
He found Liz, but I did find it in you, so I'm happy for me.
Thanks. I feel the same way about you.
That's really sweet. And totally genuine, just to repeat back what someone said to you to them as a compliment. It's very thoughtful.
You have a 6-word review?
This is not really a 6-word review.
Okay. Tell me whatever you feel in your heart, Robert.
I pray Darcy is not recurring.
Don't worry, she's not.
Thank God.
I didn't mind her that much. I feel like I minded her more as a kid. She made me insane. But I don't know. The latest time I read it, I just had fun with her. I guess because I knew it doesn't go anywhere. Like the whole time I was stressed out that she was really going to get Liz fucked over. I mean, she does in one sense, but like she doesn't have some sneaky motive that we learn about. She turns out to be just whatever. So that's a relief for me. But we'll get into it, I guess. But so you hate Darcy.
I hate
Is that
Darcy.
what you hated most about this?
No.
What did you hate most?
Well, what I
Go
hate...
off, honestly.
I mean, the plot holes are enormous.
No, the plot's a joke. The
plot is nothing.
We laugh.
Some of us aren't laughing.
The plot takes credulity and it sort of injects it with a bunch of helium and it sort of lets it float off to the sky. It says, bye.
Bye. Liz behaves like no human being has ever behaved throughout the entirety of the text. There's one moment where I'm like, oh, this is how real someone, like, this was real. Every other moment, I was like, this is not how human beings behave. The central mystery of the plot or the thriller of the plot makes no sense. It could have been a pamphlet.
Oh my God, wow.
And I feel like what I loved about the first thriller was it took what we're used to and it ratcheted it up. And it was like, let's throw murder in. Let's throw this in. Let's throw that in. This felt like just like every other book. We had our favorite friends. Watch out, he's got a gun. It didn't feel like it was upping the stakes at all to me.
It's so interesting because I've read this multiple times and I feel like I used to hate it. And by the time I read it now, I was just finding, maybe I was so used to hating it that it was more interesting to find things I liked. Maybe that's what it is. or maybe it's that I'm discovering additional layers. I don't know. You'll tell me, I guess. I don't know. This time I found things interesting about it. When I read the book this time, I started to see it as sort of a response to its own conundrum. And what do I mean by this? With the super editions that all take place during the same sort of multiverse summer, and you have to just accept that, with this one, what we're getting is successive, like the twins getting embroiled in like being chased by murderers, like what, 4, 5, 6 times in one summer. And I feel like since this is the second book, I started to see it partly as like a response to, okay, we know Double Jeopardy just happened, and how are we going to contextualize this within that? Because it's not like, well, Double Jeopardy just happened, but like the super editions, that was in Nice and now we're going to Malibu, so nothing's going to come up. It's like, no, they're working at the same office. They're working with the same colleagues. Adam, Steven's roommate, who was part of the first thing, is still there staying at their house in the summer. And so they do have to orient it to that in a way. And so I guess I see it almost a little bit of like satire of like, because what happens in this book, I think, is like, it goes a pretty long way where there is no immediate threat. It all happens within the specter of this DeLuca case that we're going to talk about. But for there to be a sort of immediate sense of actual danger and see how that's going to impact us doesn't happen until really the very end. And this whole thing of like, are they actually going to do this again is sort of being raised through the whole thing, I feel like, in a fun way.
She's counting, ladies and gentlemen, and others.
8 words, and it's a question. Have we had a 6-word review that's a question?
I'm sure you have. You are always playing with this form.
I do love to play with form, sort of like the MTV logo. Such a famous cultural symbol. Why? Because it was a frame. Because anything could go in it. Because it had oh, you're frozen.
I might just be bored.
Okay. Where was I? Okay. My review is a question. What?
You're funny. Continue.
My review is a question that I'm posing. What is at stake in the DeLuca trial? As I just alluded to, this whole book is happening within the context of this trial that like apparently has a sort of nationwide grip, sort of like O.J. Simpson vibes, where it's like everyone's constantly talking about it, everyone constantly has the TV on. It's happening in New York, in theory, like the sort of locus of it is in New York around this mob boss, Frank DeLuca. But Sweet Valley, we're at the breakfast table debating it, we're at the office debating it. And what we see happen, and before it's sort of made clear the ways in which this is going to actually infiltrate their lives in a sort of tangible way, leading to guns and faces and men in gray suits following in black Mercedes or whatever it is.
Gotta get that notebook.
There's a lot of interpersonal dancing happening vis-a-vis stance taking to this case. A lot seems to kind of hinge on the outcome of it. And I think that's a tension that's set up from the very beginning that I actually think is kind of super rich.
Okay. I have a 9-word question. Does the witness protection program make you gain weight?
Yeah, it's like if you're trying to get an Oscar, it's like if you're trying to get an Oscar to one of these roles, you got to put some, we talked about the schnoz prosthetics, but there's also that getting fat can get you an Oscar. So can getting skinny, Black Swan, which I'm going to mention again later. But
Brendan Fraser in The Whale, which I'm going to mention right now.
Yeah, of course, we throw forks at the TV and we say,
no,
toxic, fat-phobic messages. We're not interested. No,
which actually relates great to this book where there are lots of toxic fact. I was like, why?
That's what I meant about Black Swan. Literally, Alice Wakefield is Black Swan. Alice
I
Wakefield,
haven't seen, so please, of course, no spoilers.
I've only seen the first 20 minutes. I famously hated it. But she's what I imagine happens. Okay.
Shall we?
Well, there's the one back tagline. I assume, have you seen the cover or taglines?
I have kind of seen the cover just because it's hard not to. It's got 2 girls on it. I think they're blonde.
Sure. Yeah.
But I haven't investigated it. And the back tagline is a thrilling stranger, ...
Niet.
A mysterious new boy, ...
Close. Well,
Oh.
sort of close. A shadowy past.
Ooh, dot, dot, dot.
Dot,
I
dot,
see.
dot.
I love that. And of course, we're thinking, what are shadows? What is the past? The past isn't even past, etc. So it's very rich.
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with the title, sort of the same ambiguity. The title's On the Run, and I
Mhm.
think that for me, the ambiguity that encompasses is like in this whole book, Jessica and this girl Darcy decide that this guy Eric, who seems to have a shadowy past and does the famous thing that mysterious guys like to do when they're hiding something, which is only ask questions about the girl, and like a shadow cloud comes over their eyes when you ask them anything about themselves. And the question is, what's his secret, basically? And Jessica and Darcy decide that he's like this wanted murderer or whatever, and that he's like going to kill Liz. And it turns out he's actually a victim. He's actually, his shadowy past isn't that he's a perpetrator, it's that he's running from the mob boss
Mm.
because his dad is this guy that famously testified against the mob boss, and that's why they're in witness protection. And so no one knows who they really are. And so I think the title On the Run is like, we might think, and if we look at the cover, we might think the girls are on the run from being chased by a murderer, which is what this thriller is sort of about, or trying to be about, or whatever. But like the twist of the book is that no, Eric's on the run. He's a victim. He's the scared one being chased by a murderer.
That's so interesting. So I never read the title as On the Run, the girls are on the run. I read the title as leading me to think Eric's on the run as a murderer versus Eric's on the run as a victim. I never thought
Maybe
the
the,
girls would run. I think all three work, which I love. I love that you brought the girls into it because they are ostensibly the main characters.
but I wonder if I also think that because they're on the cover and like, well, let's look at the cover because
Let's look at the
like,
cover. What we talk about when we talk about covers.
right, like maybe that's what made me think it's also suggesting like that, you know.
The
So
girls
same
look
with the
great.
huh?
The girls look great.
And they look so much themselves, you know. Sometimes there's something weird going on. Nope,
Yeah.
this is our canonical Jess and canonical Liz, pretty much.
Hot. Hot, hot,
Jess,
hot.
I mean,
Beautiful blonde hair.
Jess especially.
Yeah, just a stunner. Liz is wearing like a satin Peter Pan collar. I know it's not a Peter Pan collar. I never know collars, but maybe it's like a pajama blouse collar.
I think it's a notched collar.
There's definitely notches. I think that's very helpful. In like a powder bluey kind of thing. It looks like the kind of thing that would wrinkle and wear terribly, but she doesn't care. And her hair
It's
is
absolutely a synthetic, not breathable fabric. It's
Yeah.
absolutely some sort of polyester blend. And let's just say there's stains on those pits. I'm telling you, because if they're being,
they're there on the cover. I see pit stain.
yeah, I do too.
Meanwhile, Jessica looks almost like she's dressed kind of like Ina Garten or something. Like she's wearing an oversized coral button down. Interestingly,
Sort of
Jeffrey
salmon,
is an
sort of
overlap.
salmon color.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It's like
She-
faded.
Like a dusty salmon.
It's very cool, yeah. Very like would be cool now to wear.
Yeah. She's grabbing Liz's arm. She has fear in her eyes. They're outside of a building. I assume they're outside the business building where they work, the newspaper office, etc. I just know you like the
The
environment.
Western Building is what it's called. When I looked at this first, I was like, didn't think much of it. And then when I looked at it again, I thought, oh, isn't it interesting? It kind of encompasses their conflicting perspectives because it feels like if you picture them looking at Eric, Jessica seems the much more dynamic in motion one.
Mhm.
Doesn't it seem that she's pulling on Elizabeth's
Oh yeah.
elbow, sort of trying to get her to run? So I picture it that they're looking at Eric and Jessica's saying like, come on, he's the threat. But Liz is more wanting to go towards him, more intrigued by him. You know?
Mhm. So I think you did a great job. I love the analog of O.J. Simpson as a trial that is kind of gripping the nation. So Frank DeLuca is a mob boss. He has been apprehended at the scene of a murder, but no one will come forward to testify. And so it seems like he is going to get off.
It's very Bob Durst, I have to say, because it's very much this thing of like everyone supposedly knew, and it was just this known thing that he was guilty. He just like ran around New York free most of his life because no one would testify against him because he would have them murdered or he'd pay them off. So I don't know, it reminded me of that. And this thing of like, oh, it's so frustrating because everyone knows. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No. This gives rise to a lot of incredibly boring and stupid conversations about whether people are good or bad. And like it seems like the entire community is having these and this is not a main plot point, but this is something I found so annoying about the first quarter of the book and then the back quarter of the book. Like everyone seems to think the central issue is like, are people good and selfless enough to come forward and testify, or are people too selfish and so they don't testify? And it's like the dumbest non-debate ever, that people don't not testify in a mob boss's murder case because they're selfish. Right?
There's so much. Well, okay. Okay. Let me put it this way. I agree that this whole scenario is very stupid in the sense that it isn't realistic to how people really act and talk about this stuff. The way everyone is like so positive about their like assessments of this situation. And so just so it's understood, okay? The situation is that Frank DeLuca killed this guy, Ray Underwood. Okay, there was this brave guy, Ray Underwood, who was going to testify against him and he had him killed. And now everybody's worried that there's no case for, I don't know if it's for a million murders or for racketeering or whatever he's on trial for, but everyone's worried that there's no case because there's not enough evidence and the prosecutors are scared that no more witnesses are going to come forward because he has a history of getting rid of them. And so this is engendering this public debate, or at least in Sweet Valley, around like these sort of competing evaluations and predictions of the situation. And a lot of things are conflated, which I think you're saying, in this sort of setup. And it's like a competition of worldviews that gets enacted through this, which is one of them is like the quote unquote like cynical worldview, the worldview that doesn't see the best in people, that thinks that people are self-interested and not brave enough to put themselves at risk in this way. And those people say, well, unfortunately, no one's going to come forward. And that's just how it is. And that's reflective of like a nature of humanity. It's actually a theory.
What am I hearing? Listeners, we heard like very strange noises in the background, and then Pardo just ran off. And we are reading a thriller, and we know that Frank DeLuca is selling property at Pardo's house. And so I am currently terrified that something horrible is happening. So I'm just sitting here kind of like, oh gosh, what if I'm the last person to see Pardo alive? What do I do? What do I do? Becky, we're praying for you. Okay, I can see her.
Hi, I'm really sorry.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
That wasn't Frank DeLuca?
No. So it's basically a theory of like what are people, like the nature of people, like
Yes.
it's like a moral theory. And the other people are the supposed, I don't know, optimists, the Elizabeths who say, no, people are brave, there's good people out there, and someone's going to come forward. And that's why I think it's such an interesting question to ask, what hangs in the balance of this case? Because the supposed verdict on this debate of moral worldviews seems to hinge on the outcome of this case for people. By debating their predictions of is someone going to come forward or not, like they take that as proof that like they were right, that people are mostly this or people are mostly that, hinges on the actions of like one person. I think it's stupid in the sense that it's so blunt, but I do think it's super rich in the fact that it does reflect the ways in which these types of discourse about world events and these types of discourse about the news is a way for people to not only like enact interpersonal relations and interpersonal dynamics, but also, you know, construct identities, project authority vis-a-vis supposed like superior knowledge or access to heuristics for evaluation or something. And I have a couple of things I could share. The concept of stance is a big concept in linguistic anthropology. And I thought of it when reading this. So I have a couple of just little quotes for you, okay?
Okay.
So just to define, Alexandra Jaffe, who was not very generous when I was trying to submit an article to her journal, she made me do about 10 million revisions and it's kind of annoying about it. But she did write a great book. She edited a great book. Stance, Sociolinguistic Perspectives, okay? So Scott Kiesling has a chapter on it. He says, I define stance as it's a person's expression of their relationship to their talk, their epistemic stance, which is how certain they are about their assertions, and a person's expressions of their relationship to their interlocutors, their interpersonal stance, i.e. friendly, dominating, and so on, right? Epistemic and interpersonal stance are often related. Someone who is being patronizing, which is an interpersonal stance, is usually expressing that they're also very certain epistemic stance about what they're saying. So when Seth and Dan Weeks are at the office debating what's going to happen in this case, and when Darcy and Elizabeth are debating what's going to happen in this case, and then they refer to how did they get that knowledge? And well, Darcy's father's a businessman. And oh, well, Liz only writes a gossip column. You know, they're enacting all kinds of other battles vis-a-vis the stance taking. Jaffe says, because it is often the case that multiple social and linguistic positions, identities, and stances are relevant or useful for particular social actors, they can have an interest in exploiting the fundamental indeterminacy or multivalency of stance taking to maintain flexibility of self-presentation and potentially unpredictable or volatile social fields of reception and interpretation. So I think of this from Darcy, because Darcy initially was like, well, my father says that people are self-interested and no one does anything if they're not getting any money for it. And then later it looks like someone's going to come forward and she's like, I always knew this would happen and people are brave. And Elizabeth calls her out on it and she's like, well, I thought you said that actually that would never happen. And Darcy's saying, I'm trying to actually exploit the multivalent and indeterminate nature of this situation.
If I may?
Yeah.
I also was thinking about it in terms of kind of developmental perspectives, because I love what you're talking about stance taking, and I love this idea of the way that we're asserting kind of how we see in the world. It's also, I mean, we would be fools if we forgot that these are young people. I mean, everyone involved in this conversation is under 25, prefrontal cortexes are developing, and we can see the way that they engage in this kind of very binary thinking. And this idea where you said very beautifully, like they take the actions of this one person to indicate people at large. And that's something that we see in kind of adolescent development, where young people are working through kind of making sense of their own binary notions and learning to see more gradually. So while I found it so fucking annoying, I also was like, wouldn't Pardo say I would say this is well observed? And the answer is yes. Dr. Pardo.
Except the grown-ups do it too.
Yeah, well, yeah, most grown-ups are children.
Okay. So that's basically the scene. Then what happens? So basically, Jess and Liz are back at their internship at the newspaper, okay? They've been at the summer internship. Murder happened last time, whatever. Now they're still at the internship. Everyone's talking about this case. There's a new intern called Darcy who just moved here from what, Ohio?
Ohio, famously.
Ohio. And she is a bitch to Liz. And
she's the worst. She's one of the worst people we've met.
She sucks. And she does these sort of low-grade sabotaging of Liz where she makes her submit an article with a typo in it and like makes her get the wrong kind of coffee for one of the editors and like does these things to just make her look bad. And Jessica loves her because she is into clothes and boys.
I will say I thought it was also well observed. Like the very first thing Darcy said, I was like, ugh, I hate this girl. And then I was like, this is clearly coming from insecurity. And I think we see throughout that kind of through line of her adopting kind of an interpersonal stance of like confidence and bravado. But I think that masks a certain underlying epistemic stance of frailty and unsurety.
Almost. But
I'll take almost.
Then there's a couple of Francine's herrings, which is what we call kind of red herrings in these books. Like, for example, like, so she just moved here from Ohio. Okay. So the whole book starts off with the fact that like, is a witness going to come forward or not? Right. In this case. And then like say halfway through the book, it's like a witness has decided to come forward. And it's like this doctor, and this doctor apparently has this like signed piece of paper from the dead guy, Ray Underwood. That's like, I'm telling you for sure, Frank DeLuca is the worst. And like,
so
here's my name signed and like put him in jail. When it's determined that like, okay, guess what? Yay, there actually is going to be some guy who comes forward and like, yay, we're right. Like people are actually brave. And then they're like, okay, well, he testified, like, now what's going to happen to him? And Frank DeLuca's guys are going to get him. And someone's like, honey, Liz, like, they'll put him in something called the Witness Protection Program. We'll get a disguise and, like, go move somewhere. And Liz is like, yay, he won't be made dead. And then it's like, okay, well, we know someone from Witness Protection is going to show up here. Who's it going to be? Well, we have Darcy, who just moved here from Ohio. And seems like a bitch. Is she going to be somehow connected to this? Like, I don't know. Then we meet Eric, the like quiet and sensitive hot guy in the coffee shop. Guess what? He also just moved here from Ohio. Is that a coincidence? Is one of them something? Then we get the red herring of Andy, the new hot intern, who like shows up for, I don't know. I thought that was sort of a red herring of like,
Okay.
he's also like, he came here from Stanford and like, he's also one of the cute guys who just moved here from somewhere and is going to be in our apparently circle. And like, he doesn't end up being anything, but like, there's a lot of sort of new people around that are from places, and like we know someone's lurking around the country somewhere in witness protection. And from these books, we know that when people are in disguise or have to be like on escape from stuff, like they usually end up in Sweet Valley.
Yeah,
Or
it's the
Malibu.
only place to go. All roads lead to Sweet Valley.
And
Unless, of course, Liz is taking a summer job in Malibu, in which case they end up in Malibu.
And bad guys are always named Frank or Frankie.
I mean, yeah. Which
Wait, what
is
was the
why
other
I'm
guy's
so
name?
scared.
Who was the other guy? Frank LaSalle? Frankie LaSalle? Wasn't that
Yeah,
his
that
name
sounds good
in
to me.
Malibu Summer?
That
So
sounds good to me.
we've had two Frankie murderers, that means. That's crazy.
Alleged.
I told you,
Alleged.
and
Just
the
we
root to
can't be
Italian
sued.
people.
We
The root to
can't.
Italian people. They are root to Italian people. Sal Ciardi had a round face, and the other two Italians are murderers. Ah,
Again, I don't know if having round face is rude, but we can let that be. I never thought Darcy or Andy were red hair. Like, I can understand why they could have been. They just seem so clearly not the focus that I felt like the more red herring-y, which was obviously the central red herring, was like, who
Yes.
is this Eric?
yes.
I mean, we know he's Jewish, but what else do we know about him?
So why don't you explain Eric and the question of who is he? Or did I already say it?
I think you said it. So Eric is new to town. He moved with his dad. His parents separated. And something that anytime Eric talks about the past at all, a shadow comes over his face.
Which literally, let's just say the guys who we've done this. Jack from Showdown did that. Jamie Galbraith probably did it.
I'm sure.
Dennis,
The nose?
yeah, where he's like, "Oh, I'll meet you there," and like, I don't know what high school I go to.
Oh, yeah.
There was another murderer who did that too. Anyway, go on.
But I do just want to say, I'm 40 years old. Never in my entire life have I been talking to someone
And the
and have
shadows
I
cross
been
over
like,
their face.
oh, a shadow's come over their face. Like, I literally can't even picture what that means. And it happens 4,000 times in this book and in other books. And finally, it's just like, literally, what are we talking about? A cloud, a shadow. It's
Wait,
like,
I do know what it means, and I think
do it
I
for
like
me.
do it for you.
Do it.
Okay, we'll just be having a conversation, then you
Yeah,
say
of course.
something that triggers me.
Okay,
So
okay,
Robert,
okay.
like, how was your breakfast today?
Thank you so much for asking. So I had Greek yogurt and I threw in frozen blueberries and raspberries and strawberries, but I put them in overnight so they can melt. Yeah, that's not a cloud coming over your face.
Oh, sorry. What did you say about blueberries?
Okay, that was terrifying. And you are a chameleon. That was beautiful.
Suzanne did that too. Suzanne Devlin did it too when she talked about how her parents sent her to boarding school stuff.
So is that what a shadow is when it comes over your face? You just kind of like have a brief mini, like a...
No, it's like when the veneer dropped. It's just like a darkness where they're thinking about like, ooh, like I have a shadowy past. It's like this. This is what I would do if I was trying to be having a shadow on my face. I'd be like this.
Okay, so you kind of momentarily get a little glum.
But it's like maybe only in the eyes.
Yeah. It's just not something I've ever experienced. And I ask people
feel like I
probing questions
have.
about their past all the time.
I feel like it's real. I don't know. I do get what it is. Oops. Maybe I just feel like that because I've read this book so much.
Yeah, I do
So
think
it's like,
that's...
yeah, of course a husky voice is what a voice is husky. It's like Jeffrey. My reference for these books is itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is kind of a snake eating its tail or a tautology of some kind.
And so the sort of central herring is then that this Ohio thing where Darcy's like, ooh, he's cute. Like, let me call my girlfriend Sue from Shaker Heights because he's also from Shaker Heights or something, or Cleveland, and like, yeah, Jews. And we'll get the scoop on him or whatever. And then she calls her friend Sue and she comes back to Jessica. She's like, well, she didn't know anything about Eric. But in unrelated news, oh my gosh, the most worst thing happened in Sue's town. Like some girl got murdered and like some guy did it. And like, I don't know. It's like, sounds like it's this guy that just goes out with girls and murders them. And like,
so the
Jessica's like,
central
okay.
thriller is Liz has started to secretly date Eric, but Darcy and Jess are convinced that Eric has come here from
Shaker
Ohio
Heights.
on the run as a murderer with his father, who has also adopted an alter ego.
Yeah, his father's protecting him in this. I've thought a lot about this. Yeah, his father's like just in on it, and like they're just, I don't know, his father said like, okay, I'll do this for you. I don't think it makes sense.
Okay.
And it must be said, one thing we're not going to be able to skip, I don't even know what to say at this point. I feel like a disappointed teacher or like parent right now, where I just feel like I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. There's nothing more to say. Guys, what are we doing with composites? It's like
I know.
it's like this.
Yeah.
It's like these books have someone who's the composites editor, and that person is just tripping mushrooms all day. And this is one of their jobs. Is like, well, I'm a composite editor for Sweet Valley High, and it's like, what does that mean? It's like, oh, whenever there's like something where they don't know like what someone looks like, and there's like a suspect, I'm like gonna come in and give them a story about composites. It never makes any sense. What happens in this book? Okay, can I just lay it out because it's insane?
Of course.
So,
Can I just one quick thing? Is
yeah.
it a Canadian thing to say composite instead of composite?
Composite. I don't know if it's Canadian or if I'm saying it wrong or if it's just two different pronunciations.
I like both.
Okay, so I'm just gonna keep saying composite.
I love that.
So, like what Darcy first says she learned from Sue is like, this girl got murdered, no one has any idea who did it. Then when she next hears from Sue, they do have any idea who did it. This guy, Chris Wyeth, who she dated. Which, duh, if a girl gets murdered, it's obviously the boyfriend. Literally, I could tell you that. Don't know anything about her. And Jess is like, oh my God, what if it's Eric? And Darcy's like, well, let's not go to the police. Let me get some more information from Sue. And then Jess is like, well, okay, but if he starts dating someone in Sweet Valley, then we go to the police. And Darcy's like, okay. Then she like finds out he's dating Liz, but she like can't get in touch with Liz fast enough or whatever. Darcy's like, my friend Sue's gonna text me this composite. Wait, how do I say it?
You say it composite.
That's what I'm trying to say. Darcy's like, Sue's gonna text me the composite from the police, and then we'll see if it looks like Eric, and like then we'll know if we should be worried or not.
By text, we mean overnight mail because it's 1988.
Fax or whatever. Yeah. So I'm like, must it be said why this makes no sense? Must it be actually explained? What is the purpose of I'm just going to explain to my knowledge in case I'm missing something, okay? What is the purpose of having someone sit down and draw pictures for the police of what some guy might look like? Well, it's because we don't have a photo. This person is wanted. This person is on the lam, and it's because we only know what they look like. We don't know who they are. Or if we know who they are, for some reason we don't have a photo. But like, not when you have a suspect who is known, you know his name, there's no reason, there's no photo, you don't have to waste your time doing arts and crafts. Like, what are we doing? Like, it's crazy.
Arts and crafts.
So they send a picture of the drawing, they're like, well, it could look like Eric, and then they like decide it's Eric, and it turns out it's not Eric. Eric's like actually being in the witness protection program, and in the end we'll get to the good neighbor safety system.
Oh,
but
for fuck's sake.
But that whole thing with the composite made me crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we should just be sending around his yearbook picture.
Literally.
His driver's license photo.
Literally. Okay.
I mean, also, it was the 80s. Maybe they didn't have as many.
I was thinking that too, but they did. Yearbooks, like you said.
I did say that, and I was right.
Driver's license.
So we're supposed to believe, like, the central tension of this text is the thrillingness is Liz has started secretly dating Eric. She's keeping it a secret because she's still with Jeffrey, although Jeffrey, of course, is summer camp counseling. And that exposes her to this potential murderer.
Yeah, because we know he likes to murder girls he goes out with. And then the big climax is that, like, she hasn't also been telling him about Jeffrey. And then he suddenly learns about Jeffrey by accident at the Dairy Burger, and a shadow crosses his face. And it's like, oh shit, now he's really going to murder her.
But, like, so to believe that, we have to believe that Eric and his dad are in this together.
Mm-hmm.
We have to believe that anyone from Ohio is any 17-year-old from Ohio is equally likely to be a murderer. Like, it's just like, none of this makes.
Well, he looks like the composite. He looks like the composite.
That's probably true.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. And awful.
And so, no, it turns out, right, that he is the son of the doctor that had testified. And the way that that gets revealed is that a kid chokes at the coffee shop and they're like, is there a doctor? Is there a doctor? And he does like an emergency tracheotomy on him with a straw. And then fucking Mr. Beckwith, fucking idiot moron Mr. Beckwith, the neighbor of the Wakefields, shouts out to a huge crowd and like reveals his identity. Like, you're Dr. Ryan, you're Dr. Ryan, you're in the witness protection program. That's why you have a beard. And then he's like, oops, I guess we were revealed. And Jess and Darcy are like to Eric, so you're not actually a murderer? He's like, no, my name's actually like Michael Ryan. And they're like, well, are you still Jewish then? He's like, I don't know. And then he's
Yes,
like,
so yes, he is.
he's like, Liz, come to my house so we can have a nice goodbye and talk about my poetry love letters I wrote for you. And she's like, oh no, I'm so sad you're actually leaving. And then
But worse than that, she says, don't go, don't go. You can't leave. Stay here. You'll be safe here. People in Sweet Valley will be good to you here. You have nothing to worry about. Stay here. It's safe here.
and it's like,
Are you
again,
fucking kidding me?
this whole sort of worldview debate is continuing to be played out because it's like when Dr. Ryan does the tracheotomy and his identity gets revealed, he's like, well, we're gonna have to move again. And Elizabeth and maybe other people there were like, no, like people in Sweet Valley are good. Like no one would ever give up your identity to the bad guys. And he's like, well, I've seen enough to know that actually like I used to be like that, but now I think people would give away my identity. And then it turns out like guys have been following them and they're like, see, and Elizabeth's like, no. But then she finds out that they like found out not from someone in Sweet Valley. And she's like, yeah, you're like, people are good. And then they're like, no, people are bad because like they end up with guns in the Ryans' house while they're packing up to leave. And the biggest straining of credulity happens, which I guess we could take it to the text, but basically just to say is that they like, these guys have guns, they're holding Dr. Ryan at gunpoint, right? He like sends the Eric and Liz up to the den. And the guys with guns are just like, yeah, okay. And then Liz is like, oh, look, the safety button for the neighborhood security system. And Eric's like, what the fuck is that? And she's like, it's like a panic button and it alerts the neighbors and it's called the good neighbor system. It also calls the cops and like, then the neighbors are going to call a safe password. If you don't say it back, it means like someone has a gun to your head. So that happens. Dr. Ryan obviously doesn't say the password back. They know he has a gun to her head. All the neighbors come and like overtake the guys with guns. They're like, yay. And then the cops come and lock up the bad guys. And Liz goes, or no. And it's basically like the moral order of the universe is restored. And you know what? Even though order was undermined, it was repaired at the end. And we can now restore and like validate this worldview that like people are basically good or whatever the fuck. But the funniest part of the whole thing is when he pushes the panic button. He's like, I don't know. I don't think anyone's going to call. I don't think anyone's going to call and do the password. Like, we don't even know our neighbors that well. And she's like, trust me, the neighbors of Sweet Valley will do their part. And then the phone rings and she looks at Eric and she's like, she goes, it's working. The system's working. And I like circled that. I mean, I didn't circle in my book, but I like circled it in my notebook of like, oh my God, this is like the whole thing of the whole book, right? It's like the system is working. This is what is at stake also. The justice system. Will the justice system work? You know, what happens when bad guys go free and so on. And so it's like really a lot of putting together of the whole sort of moral fabric of the country, TBH. But the biggest fucking stupid thing of all of it, like, first of all, they didn't tie Elizabeth and Eric up, fine. They let them out of their sight. But I'm like, why do they even need the panic button system? There's probably a phone in the den. And like, how come the bad guys weren't about them going on a phone in the den calling 911? Like, it's not like they were in a closet or something. There was a panic button in it. Also, it's not like they said they cut the phone lines.
Also, it is not like the bad guys need anything from them. The bad guys should have just killed them on sight. There's no reason to keep them alive.
No, there was no reason that this was a conversation, that there was no negotiating, there was no rant, there was nothing.
Because there's no information, there's no... He's already testified, no. So all that can happen is he gets killed. Literally.
Like, all they should be doing is, like, shooting them the first second they get. But that wasn't the book, but...
That wasn't the book.
So that was all fucking stupid.
Yeah, it was. I like the part where you're talking about kind of the need to restore moral order and the fact that the system works, because we get several, like, kind of discussions around whether the legal system works, and whether we can trust the legal system and who we can rely on. And it does seem to tie it all up nicely with a bow at the end. Like, oh, it does all work. And it's like, guys, do y'all not realize that like tons of people are dead? Like those random girls in Ohio are dead, and all the people that Frank DeLuca killed are dead. Like the system doesn't work at all.
It's
Nothing
like
has been prevented.
maybe because the first book also was saying the system doesn't work. In the first book, their brother's friend that's living with them was wrongfully being charged with the murder of his girlfriend. He almost like went to jail for that. And it was like, if not for them revealing who the actual murder was, that was so obvious, the system was not working there. Yeah, there's this sense that they have to like balance it out, it feels like. By the way, I'm sure you noticed a glaring like inconsistency.
The lack of the intimacy coordinator on set.
They called her Lori Forbes in this book, and her name is Lori Hamilton. And I did go back and check the girl that got murdered in the last Thriller.
Oh, she was already dead to me, so I did not care. But that does seem like a problem.
I was like, what, why?
Yeah.
Why would they do that?
Is it a commentary on like the interchangeability of female victims?
I don't know.
Every one of these books, it's just women getting killed.
I know.
It's always the boyfriend. So some of the other stuff that really frustrated me were things like when Liz says, you can stay in Sweet Valley, it's safe here. We immediately think about what's already happened in this book and in previous books and in non-thriller books, where it's like, Sweet Valley is definitely not safe. When she says your identity is safe here, his identity has been compromised by Mr. Beckwith, but his identity had already been compromised because the bad guys were already there.
Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh, weren't those like your protection? And he was like, no. And remember, and Liz also gets stopped by someone with an FBI badge.
But he's not really an FBI guy.
Being like, where's Eric? And like, he wasn't really being an FBI guy.
What is weird is the bad guys clearly know where Eric and his father are. Because they follow Jess and Liz to and from the Hankman's house. Why wouldn't they just go kill them?
TBH, my theory is that the bad guys are having like a crisis of conscience.
Oh.
Because they're like stalling or something. It's the only explanation.
That or
because they're not that, otherwise they're so bad at their job.
Well, I think they might be bad at job. The other thing I was really thinking about was like maybe they are like literary figure, like maybe they love poetry. And so they really wanted to get their hands on Eric's shitty teenage poetry.
Oh, we have to.
And they couldn't stand to kill an artist. That's my only other thought. His poetry is some of the worst. I mean, it's well observed teenage
a dry
poetry.
branch, no harvest this year.
It's one of those things where it's like poetry isn't just taking a sentence and breaking it up so that it looks a little longer and skinnier.
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is.
To say we touched, to say you taught me, to say I saw things new, to say I love you. None of these is enough, my friend. For your world, with all its light and hope, couldn't prepare me for this sorrow, this saying goodbye. Tell me it won't matter. Promise me wherever I am, you will be with me, in the place where goodbye doesn't matter, where forever is just an instant, and our love a bridge, connecting, linking, making all things one. I guess there's some imagery there of them fucking, which is kind of nice at the end where they get to become one. But otherwise, it's not good.
I feel like this book in some ways is like the dark Malibu summer. There's a lot of parallels to that book where, like, for example, in that book, also like Liz was dating a guy where she didn't tell Jess she was dating him. She didn't tell anyone she was dating him. And then like the fact that no one knew that she was actually out with him led to this, like she was suddenly in a dangerous situation because he was being chased by a murderer. But then like another parallel is in that book, we get an initial Pascal's gun of, it's like Jessica, Lila, and Liz are on the beach, and Jessica's reading about her new Hollywood crush, Tony Sargent. And we made a joke of like, oh, haha, we're never going to hear about him again. It turns out the guy Liz was with is him in like witness protection disguise. In this book, on page 12, we get like Jessica was looking in a magazine, or Jessica was talking about her new movie star crush, Cliff Benjamin. So I thought that was a little bit of a like, oh, are they setting us up to think that's a Tony Sargent thing? Because it's like, why bring that up? Like, why mention his name, you know? And like, never again.
That's an interesting. broken
it.
palindrome of sorts.
I have to say something.
Say it.
Well, all right. So let's just quickly talk about the weight stuff. So at the beginning of chapter 2, the Wakefields are getting Mexican food, and there's this thing of Alice is like reaches for a second taco, and she's like, I really shouldn't. And then Stephen says, Mom, you can't weigh an ounce more than the twins do. You could pass for a model. And Adam's like, I agree with that. And then they're like, yeah, she does. And we've talked before about the oppressive standards on Alice and this idea that like she literally is not allowed to weigh more than her daughters.
Yeah.
And it's like
You can't weigh an
it's
ounce
really
more.
disgusting and really, really fucked up. And like that's when I thought of Black Swan or whatever I pictured Black Swan to be of like the sort of dark drama version of this is like Alice Wakefield like in a mirror at night, you know, and she's just stretching her face and she's just like sort of scrutinizing and obsessing over, you know, is there a line? Is there an ounce? And this sort of regime that she lives under. And then I had an observation that I said, wow. You know how we're always talking about like the famous trope of the books, and like the one to which I just referred is like Alice's spitting image of the girls, and Ned and Stephen is looking alike, right? But while Alice is described as looking like the girls, it's not that Ned is described as looking like his son Stephen. Stephen looks like Ned.
Okay.
Why? Because for men to look older is aspirational. For women to look younger is aspirational. We see Alice is always being confused for their sister. She doesn't weigh more an ounce than them. She is always could look identical to them. And yet Stephen is the spitting image of his father. Why? Because, as Gloria Steinem told us, men age and women rot. Because it is good for the men to be looking older. Isn't that something?
That's definitely something. I think you're totally right that men age and women rot. I think what women do as they grow older is so gross. And the sagging and the wrinkles, like, I totally agree.
No, but I'm serious. Isn't that such the insidious pattern?
It's awful. Well,
truly.
And later in this same text, we have another meal where we welcome over the Hankmans, who is Eric and his dad, and then the belt whistle. What's that fucking
Beckwith.
The Beckwiths also come, and we have a moment talking about who's going to eat, and Steven's really excited to eat, and they all like laugh because they're always talking about how he is the one with such an appetite. He is being the hungry one.
Fuck them all. He's being the hungry one.
Yeah, I'm now just doing Pardo drag. So we're having people over to the house for hamburgers. That night, while they're getting food ready, Ned goes, oh, is it okay that I included the Beckwiths as well? Could you imagine if you were having two people over for dinner and then all of a sudden your spouse / demon monster were like, oh, I invited two more adults over for dinner. Did we plan for it's like, what?
But like, of course he did that because he never is responsible for dinner. It's usually the girls or Alice.
Yeah. Very upsetting to me nonetheless.
A small detail I liked. You know, the whole theme of like Liz guiltily having feelings for someone else and like quasi starting to date someone else, which we've seen a few times. One of the main books that happened in the main editions was Deceptions, where she liked Nicholas Morrow, right?
Of course.
And she was kind of secretly dating him, not telling Todd or whatever. And when she liked Nicholas Morrow and she was secretly dating him, they went to see a James Bond movie. And in this book, she went to see a James Bond movie with Eric.
Now, what James Bond movie did they see?
I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know.
No, it's not that you don't remember. The James Bond movie is not listed. I'm so glad you brought this up because I can't believe I was remiss in not mentioning it.
I think you checked last time.
I did check last time, but this is now 1988.
Yeah.
No Bond movie came out in 1988. So they either saw a 1987 film or they saw a 1989 film, so they got into a time machine. But either way, they're going to the movie to see a James Bond movie that doesn't exist.
But maybe it was set a year previous. You know what I mean?
No.
I think that could be.
One thing that confused me was on page 69 and 70. Eric and Liz are talking, and she said that they're identical opposites, which is a term I don't think we've heard until this book. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, really rich.
Mm-hmm.
But then she says, Jessica and I are so different that people tend to expect she's going to act one way and I'm going to act another. Sometimes we're not as totally opposite as everyone expects.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, what is happening here? And then he says, which means I can't always count on you to be on time. And she says, not that. It's just sometimes I feel I can't be as earnest and responsible as my family, Jessica especially, expects. One thing I'm wondering about here, is this her cry for fuck?
Oh, she's definitely referring to wanting to fuck him.
Okay, this is her cry for fuck, as we call it in the industry.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that she's explicitly saying something that no one in the books has actually said thus far, but we've observed, which is that the expectation that there's such opposites that they have reinforced with this kind of strategic essentialism to differentiate sometimes backfires on them more than people expect them to be these sort of extremes that don't allow for the nuance and the overlap, and where sometimes Elizabeth wants to adventure or sometimes just wants to be boring or whatever it is.
Mhm.
But it's interesting to see her actually say that. But it's strange, I think, that she says Jessica especially expects this, because Jessica in this book and literally every other book is like, Jeffrey's gone, have some fun, hook up with other guys. Like, you shouldn't be so loyal to him. It's not like Jessica is saying, like, oh, you, Liz, the loyal one, you must stay with, like, you know what I mean? Like in this book, Jessica was like, have some fun, he's gone.
Yeah, I wonder how much of this is not actually a reality of what Jess is saying or doing, but just Liz's kind of seeing it through that prism.
But
And
why?
so,
Why just say my family?
because it keeps her accountable. Because this is both her cry for fuck and her explanation of the fact that she knows herself she is not going to fuck.
Right, but why can't she just say that I can't be as earnest or responsible as my family expects? Why put Jessica especially in there when we've gotten that explicitly contradicted at the beginning?
I just think she's closest to Jessica, and so she cares most about Jessica's opinion. And so, in her mind, thinking that Jessica especially wants this is a more powerful motivator than anything else. So, the other thing that strained credulity, I guess, is so we're supposed to believe Eric finds out about Jeffrey at the Dairy Burger when Liz isn't there. And he gets really, really upset and doesn't want to talk to Liz. And then he does want to talk to Liz. And so he grabs her by the arm, drags her running through the streets of Sweet Valley down an alleyway. And he's angry and he's screaming. They never resolve anything. And then Liz is just like, oh, I love you. Please don't leave. And I just couldn't make sense of that.
Yeah, it was disturbing. I mean, the way that it quote unquote gets resolved is that, like, when you say they never resolve anything, you mean vis-a-vis the fact that she lied about Jeffrey?
Not only just the fact that she lied about Jeffrey, they never resolve his anger or her reaction to him acting like a psycho.
Right, it's because the book doesn't want that to be okay. Like, it's like the fact of this emergency tracheotomy and the fact that Eric is now in immediate danger and he is going to be leaving and he's not going to be at Sweet Valley next year, first of all, means that Jeffrey thing is sort of now a non-issue because they have to say goodbye. So I think they just decide to not care about it. You know what I mean? Because they have to say bye now, so they're not going to be mad at each other. I think it's like that. I think it's like the emergency plus that makes them just not care. But as far as him being psycho and like, I think the book wants us to think that that's like acceptable behavior from a like emotional guy, and that conveniently can then get misunderstood as like, oh no, what if he's violent, and like, haha, he's actually not, he's just like in love.
Yeah, it is like we're supposed to be so relieved that he's not actually a murderer that we're like, oh cool, everything else is fine, even though he's described as grabbing her so roughly that she is in pain and she keeps saying no. It's terrible.
Very disturbing. Very disturbing.
One other kind of thought I had, so we've been kind of framing Mr. Beckwith as a monster who reveals Dr. Ryan's true identity.
What, you think he's with DeLuca?
No.
And when he was gardening that time, it really was something sketchy?
I do think it was something sketchy, but I don't think it was DeLuca related. Were they the gardeners that we got reported on in the first book?
It was a neighbor. I don't know who their other neighbor is.
I'm just wondering if it actually was a blessing in disguise, because it acts like, oh, Beckwith tells everyone it's Dr. Ryan, and that's why the bad guys go to Dr. Ryan's house. But the bad guys already knew where to go. So I wonder if this actually made them more alert and actually helped them.
I don't think they thought it was that the bad guys knew that from Mr. Beckwith, because Eric already knew he'd been being followed. Like, he already knew that they knew where he was before that, you know? But yeah.
I wonder if Mr. Beckwith, I guess, was trying to be an agent for good by blowing up his spot.
Like, by giving them a chance to use the good neighbor system and showing that it worked.
Yeah. Well, by getting these bad guys locked up once and for all. And the only way to get those bad guys locked up is to have them being there with a gun trying to kill, and then you catch them trying to kill, and then you're good.
I just need to reiterate something about this panic button.
Mm-hmm.
A panic button is useful because, like, the whole idea is that it's concealed, right? So the whole point of a panic button is, like, someone comes in, they're looking at you, right? They have a gun to your face or whatever. You want something subtle that you can alert someone, because you obviously can't take out the phone. These guys with the guns are downstairs, and Elizabeth and Eric have, like, range of the house. So they just, like, go to the den, and they're like, yay, the panic button. I'm like, pick up the phone. Like, this is so weird. Like, why would they let them just go hang out all over the house? I didn't say they cut the phone, or at least have them cut the phone. Just have a small detail that they cut the phone lines. Then just they would have to use the... Just kill them. Actually, they couldn't cut the phone lines, because then they can... Yeah, I don't know why they don't kill them.
Kill them.
I don't know why they don't kill them. You know, if this was the show Good Girls, when they had the guns to their face, they could give them a speech and say, you think you're so smart? Well, you're actually not so smart, because you think in your world, you know, you just kill people and then that gets rid of the problem. Well, guess what? You didn't think of something this time. We're not your usual people that you just usually kill and throw away, because we are the actually normal good people, and we take our kids to PF Chang's. And when people like us are found dead, bloody in their kitchen, guess what? It actually is on the news, and actually there's hashtags about it, and you're going to draw a lot of attention over a few $1,000s. So you know what? Pull the trigger, because if you do that, you're not the smart businessman I thought you were. It's a great speech.
I mean, you really captured the essence of it. Does PF Chang's get name checked like that? And do you think they
yes,
sponsorship?
Yes.
It's great brand awareness.
Oh, they have the best product placement on the show. It's like Oreos every episode. All they talk about is, like, Kroger's and Bugles.
Love it.
I'm done playing with you guys.
What, are you gonna blow our brains out all over the room? Because that's how it works, right? Someone shorts you and they get tossed out like trash, and no one cares and no one even notices. Your problem this time is that's not us. We're normal people. We pay our taxes, and we take our kids to PF Chang's, and we take orange slices to soccer games. And when bad things happen to good people, everyone else goes crazy. It's all over the news, and there are all these hashtags and movements. So if you want to invite all that attention over a few grand, then you're not the smart businessman you think you are. Now roll the dice. Tell him to pull the trigger.
Huh. The only other thing, which is, this is why one of my 8-word reviews was about the Witness Protection Program. Mr. Hankman doesn't look one bit like Dr. Ryan. He has dark hair and a beard, and he's much, much heavier. Besides, well, of course he looks different. That's the whole point of the Witness Protection Program. So are we to believe that Hankman is wearing, like, prosthetic jowls?
Sorry, it's a beard, a gain weight, and what was the third thing?
Dark hair. I mean, I'm with you on growing out a beard and dyeing your hair. Jowls, like, to make him look much, much heavier.
No, I understand, but why does he have to be wearing jowls for this to be the case? It just says that he's heavier, but that could just mean he gained some weight, or...
I mean, it's been like days since the testifying.
Maybe he's wearing, like, a fat suit. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe he's wearing a fat suit. What? Jowls? No, he's not wearing jowls.
Not jowls, but definite fat suit?
I don't know. You said he's fatter. I don't know what to tell you.
You told me all you can tell me. A shadowy past, ... Prosthetic jowls, ...
I will say, as a kid, like, I did find this kind of the whole thing kind of exciting, like the tracheotomy and the choking and the like, oh no, now they have to leave, and the like the whole panic button thing. Like I do remember as a kid picturing our den and picturing like, oh my gosh, like what if that was me? And what if I had to press the panic button? And then what if my neighbors called and came and saved us? Yay! Like we should have a good neighbor system. I did
just
find
like
that very compelling.
it's very compelling. As a less young girl, like none of it makes any sense.
Never said it
Why
did.
would they let
Never
him answer
promised
the
you a
phone in
rose
the first
garden.
place?
What?
Why would they let him answer the phone in the first place? I'm
I
holding
don't
you at
know.
gunpoint and the phone rings. I'm like, oh, well, you might as well take this.
And as you pointed out, the whole concept of gunpoint doesn't make sense. Like, just kill him.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Well-
do love that the whole book ends with Jessica being like, isn't it funny? Like, the first couple weeks of our internship, like, we had that one murder thing, and then, like, this happened. Like, kind of makes you wonder what's going to happen next. But I have a feeling things will never be boring in our internship at the Sweet Valley News.
And then Darcy gets to be a bitch one last time, being condescending. The way it really ends is Jessica ignoring Darcy's mean comment and saying, as far as she could tell, Sweet Valley was starting to be a pretty exciting place to be. She wondered what kind of mystery was going to turn up next. And it's like, Jessica, lots of people are dead. And like, you or your family members have been held up at gunpoint so many times.
She has PTSD. She has PTSD. There's no question. This is how she's coping. Oh, you asked if Darcy recurs, and I said no. I was thinking about in the regular editions. She might actually still be there in the thrillers, but don't worry, she's not like doing anything. I think she's just like, oh, she's there at lunch or something. Like I think it's that kind of thing, but I don't really remember. Anything else?
This book bad.
I never promised you a rose garden. I didn't
You
write these.
actually did.
I think it's still entertaining, okay? And let me just tell you, if you think this one's bad, there's one that is so bad. There's one that is really, really
Worse than this? I mean, this made me
There's one that's
so
worse than
upset
this.
to read.
There's one that's worse than this, and there's one that's just what? It's like literally they're all like at the Sweet Valley News, like something's happening, like they're all kind of the same. And then there's one that's just like in the woods, ghosts crying, and you're like, what? This took a turn. But we got some doozies coming up, and then one of them is like I love it, I love it, I love it. But I'm not gonna tell you which is which.
You better not.
And then what do we have next? Robin Wilson deciding if she's going to Sarah Lawrence and if her aunt is going to control where she goes to college and decisions.
Yeah. Just go to Sarah Lawrence. Who cares?
Okay. If you are having to move to a new city because you're in the witness protection program and someone's dumb neighbor actually revealed your identity,
I mean,
what are you going to listen to on that flight?
also, you're going to be so stressed and worried about like gaining the weight and losing the weight and growing out your beard and shaving your beard. And honestly, what could be more soothing than two neurotic academics painstakingly pulling apart books written, almost 40 years ago for 14-year-old girls? We're soothing.
And you aren't going to have any friends because you can't really maintain relationships.
No,
so
we're your only friends now.
We're your friends.
Yeah.
And friendships are reciprocal. And this is not a gift economy. So you should repay us by rating, reviewing, subscribing, telling everyone you know about it in your new town. And that's how you're going to talk to them and try to sort of have a rapport without saying anything too personal. And when they ask you about
so good.
When they ask you about, oh, what happened in your old life in your old town and what brings you here, you'll say, well, I just am always listening to a certain podcast.
I love that. That's such a good cover story. Feel free to pretend to be one of the two of us. We don't care.
Yeah, feel free to sort of assume our identity.
Yeah, you now know enough about us to do it. Pardo looks like Shakira.
Listen, if you're going to choose one of us, I would choose Robert because Robert is, of course, famously a tenured professor, very, very highly esteemed. So probably Robert's the one that you're going to sort of get more mileage out of vis-a-vis social and cultural capital. I would just probably take on Robert's identity. Robert's also a little bit more likable, a little bit less combative. I would go with Robert.
So I just want to make a pitch.
Robert probably has better credit.
I do definitely have better credit than you.
So yeah.
Wait, do you have bad credit?
No, I actually have great credit.
You own a home. You have better credit than I do, certainly.
Well,
I was just going to say, Pardo, in terms of taking on her identity, you've got more like fashion and versatility to play with. And so if you take on my identity, you're wearing like kind of the same blue polo shirt or button down every day. Whereas if you assume Pardo's identity, you can kind of dress with your heart forward and your mind expanding. And I think that could be more fun and more interesting. And
But if
it
you're
could-
trying to meet people, you should take Robert's identity because Robert likes to meet people through talking about what's on their t-shirt, which
Okay.
is not something I participate in. So that's a nice way to meet people at the iced tea shop or at the Pride Parade and so on.
But of course, if you're worried about divulging too much of your identity or your past, I would go Pardo because I think there's just this sense of mystery that Pardo inhabits that you're just kind of like, oh, is she here? Is she real? Maybe, maybe not.
Is she just a reflection? One always calls out to you, the other shy and quiet. Could there be two different girls who look the same? And sweet ballet, I meet you at sweet ballet, sweet ballet, sweet ballet.
I meet you at Sweet
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.